Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Let's go to the CBN News Desk for today's top stories.
Gordon, another record high of new coronavirus cases for a single day in the U.S. at 50,000. Now, 40% of the country has either stopped or walked back reopening plans because of the disease, just before the 4th of July weekend. But there is good news in the race to develop a vaccine. Mark Martin brings us the story.
California is one of the states seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases, reporting nearly 10,000 new cases Wednesday. Bars, restaurants, and movie theaters in 19 counties have new restrictions under orders from the governor.
Bottom line is the spread of this virus continues at a rate that is particularly concerning.
Hospitalizations are on the rise in 25 states, and the number of deaths is increasing in 14. Government officials are hoping residents will follow guidelines this Independence Day weekend. On the East Coast, New York's mayor is putting a stop to plans to allow indoor dining.
Even a week ago, honestly, I was hopeful we could, but the news we have gotten from around the country gets worse and worse all the time.
Arizona saw another record spike. Vice President Mike Pence wore a mask as he arrived in Phoenix Wednesday. President Donald Trump told Fox Business, "I'm all for masks. I think masks are good." Areas of the country making the wearing of masks mandatory include Miami-Dade County in Florida, where in all public spaces, facial coverings will be required. A Miami nurse told ABC News that patients she's seeing are more critical than before. And what about a vaccine? There are positive signs for one in the next year. Pfizer just announced strong results in trials. They could proceed to their next phase with the help of 30,000 volunteers in coming weeks. And Oxford's trials are in phase 3, meaning emergency doses of a vaccine could be ready as early as October if it's discovered to be safe and effective. Moderna is also about to launch phase 3 of vaccine trials. Mark Martin, CBN News.
CBN News medical reporter Lori Johnson is here with us now. So, Lori, so much attention is being paid to the dramatic rise in COVID-19 infections in dozens of states. But are we seeing the death rate jump as well?
Actually, no. We're seeing the death rate dramatically down in so many places across the country, Ephraim. You talk about a place like Georgia, for example, where the number of cases, the number of positive cases and infections is way up, but the death rate is down to a 3-month low. We're talking about 15 deaths per day compared to a high of 43 deaths per day. That's in Georgia. So we really don't see a lot of news stories about the fact that the death rate is much lower in many parts of the country, while at the same time, the number of positive cases, the number of positive infections is way up.
So, Lori, how do health experts now explain the increase in the number of cases while at the same time the death rate decreasing?
Right. A lot of people are confused by that number. The cases are up, the deaths are down. And health experts say that it's probably one of 3 explanations, perhaps a little of all 3. Number one is we might actually see the death rate go up because of this increase in cases. We know that when a person dies of COVID-19, they were usually diagnosed with it 4 weeks earlier on average. So we're going to be looking very carefully at the death rate within the next 2 to 4 weeks. Oftentimes, a person becomes hospitalized on average 2 weeks after they were diagnosed. Although we do know that most of these new cases, Ephraim, are people who are young. And we know that young people typically do not die from COVID-19. There are some exceptions, but the vast majority of deaths are people over age 80. The group is age over 70 and so forth. So we might not see that much of an increase in death rates. We hope that's the case. And then here's another possible explanation. The COVID-19 virus may have mutated to become less deadly. That would certainly be an answered prayer.
Indeed, some critical weeks ahead. Some people question the cause of death for some people who are said to have died from COVID-19. Is it possible they've died from something else?
This is a point of contention indeed, because I mentioned before, most people who die from COVID-19 are over age 80. And 3/4 of people in the hospital who die from COVID-19 also have at least 3 comorbidities, these underlying health conditions. like heart disease, diabetes, lung problems. And when a person is in great distress, there are lots of things going on. And so when the person ultimately dies, there is a question: was it the heart disease that killed him, or was it some sort of the COPD, the lung problem? But they did test positive for COVID-19. So a lot of times people will chalk it up to COVID-19 when there is some question that maybe it was one of these other conditions that ultimately caused their death.
So, Lori, what about the reports of a possible vaccine? Any idea on whether we're really going to get one by the end of the year, as many are hoping?
Yeah, it looks that way. There's good news on the vaccine front. Now there are 3 leading contenders. One of them is in the United States, the Moderna, in association with the National Institutes of Health. And this particular vaccine in human trials has shown that when you give it to a person, they produce enough antibodies to fight off the COVID-19. So now they're taking volunteers, 30,000 volunteers this month. And these are people in all different age ranges to see if it has that same result on them, and if it is in fact safe and effective on those people. But Ephraim, new polls show that as many as a third of Americans say even if there is a safe and effective vaccine, they're not going to get it. And doctors are concerned about that because we need that herd immunity. If it is safe and effective, it still might be only 50 to 70% effective. And doctors say we need lots of people to get that vaccine to protect our most vulnerable, because the most vulnerable, the older people with those preconditions, they're the ones that the vaccine might not prove to be as effective on.
All right, Lori Johnson, CBN News medical reporter, thank you so much again for your insight.
Sure.
President Donald Trump and top officials have stepped up their defense of the White House's response to intelligence reports Russia offered bounties for killing U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The president's national security advisor said he had prepared a list of retaliatory options if the intelligence proved to be true. The president says he was never told about the report, while Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Russian activity in that country is not out of the ordinary.
The fact that the Russians are engaged in Afghanistan in a way that's adverse to the United States is nothing new.
Pompeo says the U.S. took the situation seriously and that he often receives threat assessments that don't rise to the level of a presidential briefing. But lawmakers from both parties are still asking for more information on this intelligence. I want to turn now to Hong Kong. Tensions are high after China approved a contentious new national security law that has now gone into effect. It has already led to hundreds of arrests. Abigail Robertson brings us more on the shockwaves this law is sending through those fighting to keep Hong Kong's independence.
This new national security law effectively strips Hong Kong residents of their freedom of speech and legal right to criticize Beijing's government. Yet thousands have already defied it, taking to the streets to protest and risking life imprisonment. Police used water cannons to disperse crowds of protesters and arrested more than 300 people on the 23rd anniversary of the handover from Britain to China.
Yesterday, the Chinese Communist Party implemented its draconian national security law on Hong Kong in violation of commitments that it made to the Hong Kong people.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo blasted the Chinese government for turning Hong Kong into another communist-run city.
Security forces are already rounding up Hong Kongers for daring to speak and think freely. The rule of law has been eviscerated. And as always, the Chinese Communist Party fears its own people more than anything else.
The new law punishes crimes of secession, subversion, terrorism, or collusion with foreign forces.
Free Hong Kong was one of the world's most stable, prosperous, and dynamic cities. Now it will be just another communist-run city where its people will be subject to the party elite's whims. It's sad.
In response, Pompeo says the U.S. is implementing visa restrictions on Chinese officials responsible for overturning the long-held freedoms of Hong Kong's residents. And Britain announced it will extend residency rights to up to 3 million Hong Kongers. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
A final decision on Israel's plans to annex the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria in the area known as the West Bank is expected next week. That is according to the Jerusalem Post. A vote was supposed to be taken in Israel on an annexation plan yesterday, but it was postponed. A knowledgeable source told the Post that Jerusalem and the Trump administration are expected to coordinate their decision over how Israel will move ahead with the plan of annexation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said he's still in talks with the United States. And the Israeli Regional Corporation Minister said Israel will annex parts of the West Bank later this month, but not until President Trump makes his statement on the issue.